Have you ever wondered why Brisbane is such a hotspot for property investors? Well, today in the Brisbane Property Podcast episode, we're going to unveil information from the Voice of Queensland Property Panel. Find out more by tuning in.
Welcome to the Brisbane Property Podcast with your hosts Melinda and Scott Jennison.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Brisbane Property Podcast. And today Melinda and I are going to help you understand why Brisbane is a hotspot for property investors.
Yes, thanks for the intro, Scott, and welcome back, everybody. And a lot of the content for today's episode is based on a very informative presentation that both Scott and I attended recently here in Brisbane. And that was part of the Ray White auction group. They did a huge auction day at Howard Smith Wharves in Brisbane. And they had an inaugural Voice of Queensland Property Panel. So it was a very high caliber group of individuals talking about the future of Brisbane and Queensland as a property market as a whole. And it was really informative information. So this is what we're wanting to share with you as listeners, because in my opinion, the information that was shared is too good not to repeat. And I don't believe enough people heard that information. So we're going to project that and highlight some of the key points that were discussed.
Yeah, it was actually really interesting to attend. So on this panel, just some of the names and a lot of the information we'll share today, we'll probably quote some quotes off what they actually said on the day. So it's not us making it up. So Dan White, who's Ray White Group Managing Director, Antonia Mercarella, who's the CEO of the REIQ, Owen Wilson, who's the CEO of REA Group, and Don O'Rourke, who's from Consolidate Properties Group Managing Director. So they were actually up talking about this information. There was questions thrown out as well. And there was some really, really interesting information that we're happy to share.
And so off the back of this panel discussion, a lot of the commentary was around what opportunity lies ahead for Brisbane. And that's why this podcast really is aimed at those property investors that are wondering, why is Brisbane a hotspot? We're really going to be talking about the fundamentals that were discussed in that panel discussion. And it is further information over and above what we would normally cover based on research reports and things. These are on-the-ground observations. A lot of it is based on information recorded on realestate.com.au as a platform, because, of course, the Owen Wilson being the CEO of the REA Group, this is a platform that they have access to the data from. So hopefully you'll find some really good insights from the information that we share.
Now, I'll just start off with when we started to talk about it, Owen Wilson started off by saying, I expect Brisbane will see the highest price appreciation in Australia in the lead up to the Olympics. He expects that he'll see more than 50% of price growth in the lead up to the Olympic Games.
I bet some of these panelists are regretting some of the things that they may have quoted if we're going to, broadcast them to a much larger audience. But that's actually someone who obviously is understanding real estate from a platform level. Realestate.com.au or the REA Group have a lot of real estate data, a lot of information about property markets around all of Australia. So for a statement like that to be made, that's quite significant. Now, of course, when you make statements like that, it is not based on data alone. These sorts of things come together because of observations around local property markets, because of infrastructure development, because of economic development. But also from his perspective, he's seeing a shift in terms of who is actually searching for certain properties on the platforms that they actually own. So there's definitely been a little bit of a change in terms of who is searching for what, and also in what locations that he was able to share with us.
Now, we do a lot of reporting on our podcast as well about the amount of people that are searching for properties, their listings on properties, how many, on certain suburbs as well. So we sort of watch a lot of that information. Obviously, these guys at realestate.com, they track all of that information as well. One thing that we have talked about in the past, and this was touched on as well, Melinda, was the investors in the market. Where are they coming from? And we've talked about interstate people moving to Brisbane. We've talked about international. I know that they did touch on that, and it was interesting what they talked about when they talked about where the foreign investors especially are coming from.
Yeah, so according to Owen Wilson, the number one inbound inquiry into Brisbane or Queensland as a whole right now is from India. So it's the largest source of immigrants at the moment as well. And these are high net worth individuals who are looking to buy property here in Southeast Queensland. Now, when we look back 10 years ago, it was reported by Owen that the highest group of people looking to buy in Southeast Queensland was from China. So there's been a shift in that foreign investment interest, and now the leading source is from India.
So very strong interest still from the foreign investors, obviously in Brisbane, and it is attractive to them as well to get there.
I think one of the interesting things from the discussion that also came about was the fact that the inquiries per listing in Brisbane have increased about 20% recently. And that's much, much more than a lot of other places around Australia, where the interest is sort of or compares to about a 4% increase across the country as a whole. So when you see a lift of 20% in the number of inquiries per listing, it gives you an indication of the demand for particular properties. When there's more eyes looking at properties, that often translates to more inspections, to more offers, to more registered bidders at auctions. And obviously that puts that pressure on the demand side. So in the absence of supply, which is new listings becoming available for sale or new buildings being brought into the market, this is what causes price pressure, and this is what causes property prices to escalate. So in Brisbane, 20% increase in inquiries per listing, and it was mentioned that there has been a drop in the inquiries per listing from in areas including Sydney and Melbourne. So this is different across all markets around Australia, but this was the statistic that was quoting, which is quite interesting given the strong demand that we're seeing on the ground.
One other quick one, which I did note, where Owen was talking about, he travels around Australia, so he'll see all markets everywhere. He's a Victorian, he did sort of say to us as well that the energy in Brisbane is right up there at the moment. Brisbane, Perth as well, but the mood in Victoria, he said, is the exact opposite. He said it's chalk and cheese. And a lot of people are voting with their feet and moving up to Brisbane. I do talk about it in the podcast and say, well, I don't blame them, how beautiful it is up here when it's nice and sunny in winter compared to the weather they get down in Victoria.
But let's not forget, the difference of experience through the COVID pandemic as an example. I mean, here in Queensland, whilst we had a number of lockdowns, we had a lot more freedom to move around, whereas that lockdown, especially for people in Melbourne, was significant. It was hard. And, a lot of people, just don't want to find themselves living in that type of environment. And they have relocated. And that has been a consistent trend that we've seen in the interstate migration patterns. People have been relocating from Victoria, but especially Melbourne, to the Southeast Queensland corner. And whilst that has slowed down, it is still well above the long-term average. So that is something that was restated in the panel discussion that we attended.
Another quote here, Antonio Mercarella, CEO from REIQ, said that there's an extraordinary economic benefit as well, which is understandable when 2.2 million people are moving to Southeast Queensland.
Yeah, that's a lot, isn't it? And confidence is one thing that often drives property markets. We talk about consumer confidence as an indicator of market activity from time to time as well. Antonia also mentioned that Brisbane is the most exciting city in Australia to watch right now. And in fact, she went on to say that it's one of the most exciting cities across all of the world. And this is because in the next 8 years, the transformation of Brisbane will be significant because of the fast-tracked infrastructure that will happen as a result of hosting the 2032 Olympic Games. So confidence and optimism is a key element to driving demand for property in a specific market. So, these are the comments that were being made to the audience that attended, that Brisbane has the perfect ingredients right now, especially over the next 8 to 10 years.
Now, obviously the benefits when we talk about the migration, obviously the skills coming in, changing the community area, things like that. Obviously there will be, there's going to be plenty of work for everyone. The housing shortage is obviously something that was talked about. So, that's where, again, another reason why, and this was not in part of the discussion, but, when you look at the basics and say, well, why are people wanting to invest in Brisbane? Because of the growth, because of the confidence, the work is going to be here and you'll get people to rent the properties. So it's when you start to look at all this information and you break it down to simple terms, it's very, very inviting for people to be here in Southeast Queensland.
And of course, with this high and, elevated population growth that's been coming into Southeast Queensland in particular, it's very likely that between the Gold Coast, which is to the south of Brisbane, all the way up to the Sunshine Coast, it's predicted to be one big mega city. And already we're seeing those links between the whole southeast corner start to, become closer. People argue, is this actually a good problem to have? Is it good to have a lot of people coming into a location? Because obviously that does put stress on housing, and it does mean, that there's demand that's fighting against supply and prices are pushing up. But the panelists agreed that it's an excellent problem to have, providing it can be managed, because it brings enormous economic benefits into a local economy. It brings a huge diversification of skill sets, because each new person migrating, whether that's from other states, other locations, or from overseas, they will bring their own unique set of skills, which contributes to the local economy. And it creates communities of people in and around the whole area. And it's stated that you simply cannot underestimate the impact that this type of sustained growth will have over the next 1 to 2 decades. So they're suggesting that this migration trend will definitely continue for the next 10 years, but more than likely for the next 20 years, 2 decades of growth at the rates that we're experiencing now.
Now, we won't get political, but I know there was a little bit of a political discussion there. And there was a few things discussed about Olympic facilities, things like that. I think it was just left, the quote that was put here, whoever gets elected needs to focus on housing. That's one thing they definitely need to focus on. Another one that, which is, I probably will just read this as a quote. I've watched the evolution of Brisbane over the past 14 years, and it has been extraordinary. We don't like to brag. Some Queenslanders don't like to brag, but there is so much of a positive about in Brisbane, and we need to be positive in the community about the positives of the city and why it is a great place to love and to work. If you look around Australia, Brisbane is one of the most exciting cities in Australia, if not the world, and we have a bright future.
That was Antonia Mercarella, the CEO of the Real Estate Institute of Queensland, that put forward that quote. And, it really is an exciting place to be. And as a Brisbane girl born and bred, I've lived through a number of decades to watch how our city has transformed from a little country town, effectively, all the way through to the city that it is now. But I also have a vision for what the city is likely to become because of my understanding of the city planning scheme and the research and the reading that I do about what is coming, what is planned, what developments are already underway. And these are the things that it's important for property investors to really understand, because it helps you to define where you need to invest your money and what you need to invest your money into, because not every location throughout Southeast Queensland is going to deliver the same benefits to you as a property investor. And we cover this in so many episodes about ensuring that the investment strategy is tailored based on your unique circumstances, because different pockets in Brisbane will have different growth and yield deliveries or deliverables. So it's important that you understand what you're investing into and the reasons why, what you're trying to achieve. And that's going to come down to you and your individual timeframes and your risk appetite as well.
Now, Just quickly, the announcement of the Olympic Games, obviously, as they talked about at this breakfast that we went to, the announcement of the Olympic Games puts the city's growth on steroids. Basically, they said it's hard to see how the growth won't continue and be stronger than any of us are expecting. It was interesting then, and I know we both heard this. Don O'Rourke was then talking about the 3 inflection points of Brisbane. And obviously you being a Brisbane girl, Melinda, you've been through all of these. I'll let you discuss that and talk about what Don was talking about on those 3 inflection points.
Well, I think that I wasn't around for the first inflection
Not the first
point.
one.
That was when Clem Jones, first announced sewer services or created sewer services throughout our city. So that really brought Brisbane from a country town to, the beginnings of what is the city that we enjoy and live in today. I didn't write down the year that occurred, but I know it was well before I was born, well before my time, and it was back in the earlier 1900s.
I was probably reflecting on the next 2 then.
The next 2, absolutely. So the second inflection point being, something that had a really significant impact on Brisbane as a city under development or transitioning was in 1982. And yes, I was around in 1982. That's when Brisbane hosted the Commonwealth Games out at Chandler. So that was a point in time that put Brisbane on the map in the Commonwealth Games arena. And so that was definitely, something that also brought economic activity and it brought excitement to the city.
Chandler for the aquatics, QE2 Stadium. Well, it was called QE2 back then. QE2 Stadium for the athletics and the main events. And it was, I think there was a Matilda or a kangaroo. I can't remember.
Was the Matilda kangaroo.
There you go. That was the
with the little Joey's out of the pouch, I remember.
And then following that, obviously, World Expo 88.
World Expo 1988. It's when the south side or the south bank of the Brisbane River was redeveloped. And off the back of that, the legacy that's been left is beautiful parklands, public space, one of the only man-made pools, in all of the world, or the man-made beaches, I should say, restaurant precinct, lifestyle precinct. So, these big events not only contribute to the local economy, but they bring places where people can gather and they leave a legacy for people off the back of the events. The event themselves, it puts international eyes on a particular city. So obviously, hosting an Olympic Games in the modern day world in 8 years from now is going to be the 4th inflection point for Brisbane. And this is according to Don O'Rourke, who's the director of Consolidated Properties Group. That's a property developer. So they do understand market dynamics and, how property markets can shift based on, sentiment, etc.
Now, Don also then talked about the impact of the pandemic and what that's had on the property market. He said it's obviously been very interesting over the 5 to 6 years. Things are going smooth, obviously pre-pandemic, but then the journey through that has left us with inflation and it's pushed up the cost of construction, as we've talked about a lot. And he did talk then about the cost of construction.
And one of the terms that was discussed in depth was the term a discount to replacement cost. And what that means is when you are buying established properties that are already in place, what discount are you paying compared to the replacement cost, given the fact that you have land as an entry point cost and construction to rebuild that particular property? And he mentioned there are still so many areas and property types in Brisbane where, as a property investor, you are purchasing at a discount to the replacement cost. You cannot build the types of properties that they are currently building at the price that you pay for the established comparison in the market right now. So this is the big thing. If you are, a home buyer or a property investor here in Brisbane, understanding these facts will really help you to identify what and where, because what I will say is that construction costs are the same. It does not matter where you are building, you will pay the same costs for labor, for materials, whether you're 3 Ks from the CBD or 50 kilometres from the CBD. The cost of construction is consistent across various locations. The cost of land, however, is not. So this is something, again, that investors need to keep in mind, because it is the land cost that can often alter the price or the end price that people might be prepared to pay.
Now, I know that Don said they're working on a project at the moment. It's over Toowong Way. I think Hutchies are the builders on that one. And he then stated that as a developer, and this is the type of product that they obviously produce, as a developer, we can't produce a 2-bedroom apartment for under $1.2 million price point.
Just state that again.
So 1.2. So we're talking about a 2-bedroom apartment, and they can't produce that for under $1.2 million.
Just take a moment to digest that here in Brisbane. What this means, and this is what Don stated, the only new apartments that are likely to be built will be on premium sites, and they will be built to target a market who can afford to pay at least that amount. So they are building apartments to target that downsizer market who have the cash flow to be able to purchase the premium product. He also went on to say that the investment grade property or investment style of high density units that we saw a surge of throughout 2015, 2016, 2017, it's going to be a lot harder for developers to bring that type of stock to the market in the foreseeable future because of the cost of construction. So that's really a key element to take away from the discussions that we've attended that we're sharing with you.
Yeah, and don't forget, a lot of this, as we said, we're quoting what was actually discussed on the day. And these are the experts in it. These are the people that are doing this on the ground day in, day out as well.
Yes. Now, a lot of people talk about how can prices continue to increase. And this was a topic that was also discussed between the panelists. So they talked about the fact that, during property market cycles, when prices get to a point that appear to be unsustainable in terms of the rate of growth, and some would argue that, there's parts of Brisbane that have seen this unsustainable rate of growth, there's going to potentially be an inflection point. However, it was agreed by the panelists that in this cycle, what is different is that we have full employment in Southeast Queensland. So people are feeling a lot more optimistic about holding properties. They're not likely to need to sell. People are feeling a lot more optimistic about Southeast Queensland as a whole. So there's a lot of out of area money being invested into property in this region. This includes interstate investors investing in Southeast Queensland, overseas investors investing into Southeast Queensland. And also people that are relocating are very optimistic about the opportunity of getting a job and holding that job over the long term because of the outlook for Brisbane over the next 1 to 2 decades, which is really interesting from their perspective.
Yeah, I know that he'd talk a little bit, and obviously you were a bit more data inclined than myself, but they did talk about the data on the houses and units in Australia, and obviously talking about compounding growth as well.
Yeah, so obviously across Australia, when you look back historically speaking, the compounding growth rates for houses has been about 7% annually, and for units, it's been about 3% annually. So, there's a big difference in both segments of the market. And I think this is why a lot of people have concerns about investing in a higher density product type, such as a unit or a townhouse here in Brisbane or in any city, as a matter of fact. But when you consider different property types in different cities, it's so important to understand some of the information that we've actually shared with you today about the cost to bring a property to the market, or the discount to replacement cost, or the future supply potential of a particular product type, but also to understand the demand metrics. Who is lining up to look at what property type right now? Because that is going to be an indication of the price pressure. How many offers are going in on different property types right now? That is also an indication of price pressure. And so when we are out and about on the ground as buyer's agents, we can see in real time where that demand is shifting to. And this is where we're able to best advise our property investors that partner with us about what we are seeing and therefore what the market data is likely to show in the foreseeable future. Now, whilst that is the national data that has historically been in place, I was actually just doing some research this morning, and in the last 6 months in Brisbane, the unit market, according to CoreLogic data, has outperformed every other capital city and regional market in both housing growth and unit growth across all of Australia. Now, there is a reason for that, and hopefully what we've been able to cover today provides you with some insights as to why we might be seeing this huge shift in demand into the unit and townhouse market here in Brisbane, and why it's happening here in Brisbane, whilst at the same time it might not be happening elsewhere around the country.
I think one of the things they did talk about it, and I think we've touched a little bit on this as well, is the growth and how Brisbane has outperformed a lot of other areas, and also what they're seeing, the demand and the performance, and what they think will probably happen. And I think that they're basically saying it's now growing in dramatically higher rate than what they sort of expected as well. So. Look, that's some information that we got from that morning. Obviously, we tried to squeeze it into a podcast. We did spend quite a bit of time there, and there was a lot of information to take away. So that's a good read. If you can look it up, I think you can search that online as well. It's the Voice of Queensland Property Panel, and you can have a little read as well if you like to have a look at that information, which we've talked about today as well.
That's it for today's episode. We hope you found the summary of the information that we received helpful and beneficial. We certainly like to keep some real conversations happening in terms of what is going on here in Brisbane and who's saying what about Brisbane and the trajectory for the future. I think for most people, we're all hungry for information about what the future holds. And if there's one thing that people love more than anything else, it's predictions about what's going to happen in the property market, what's going to happen to property prices. And, off the back of the experts that were part of that panel, it's very likely that we're not going to see property prices slow down in terms of growth, and the outlook for the next two decades, certainly the next 10 years, is very optimistic for Brisbane and Southeast Queensland as a whole.
Excellent. That's why we're saying Brisbane's a hotspot for property investors. There's information. Thank you very much for listening. As usual, I will let Melinda wrap it up and say goodbye from myself. Hope everyone has a very safe and happy week, and we'll talk again next week. So take care and bye for now.
Thank you once again for joining us on the Brisbane Property Podcast. We hope you have enjoyed this episode and the insights that we've been able to share with you. As always, please share this episode and others with friends and family. Leave us a review if you get a chance to do so, and we will look forward to speaking with you again next week. Bye for now.